Primitive and the Professional, an essay by John Berger. During the 19th century, certain artists, for consciously social or political reasons, tried to extend the professional tradition of painting so that it might express the experience of other classes. For example, Millet, Courbet, Van Gogh. Their personal struggles, their failures, and the opposition they met were a measure of the enormity of the undertaking. Perhaps one pedestrian example will give some idea of the extent of the difficulties involved. So consider Ford Madox Brown's well-known painting work. It took the painter 10 years to complete, and it is, at one level, extremely accurate. But it looks like a religious scene, the mounting of the cross or the calling of the disciples, and one searches for the figure of Christ. I would argue that the optic of all the visual means he was using with such care preempted the possibility of depicting manual work as the main subject of the painting in any but a mythological or subjective way. The crisis provoked by those who tried to extend the area of experience to which the painting might be open, and by the end of the century this has included the Impressionists, continued into the 20th century, but its terms were reversed. The tradition was indeed dismantled, yet except for the introduction of the unconscious, the area of experience from which most European artists drew remained surprisingly unchanged. Now recently, corporate capitalism, having grounds to believe itself triumphant, has begun to adopt abstract art. And the adoption is proving easy. Diagrams of aesthetic power lend themselves to becoming emblems of economic power. In the process, almost all lived experience has been eliminated from the image, and thus, the extreme of abstract art demonstrates as an epilogue the original problematic of professional art. An art in reality concerned with a selective, very reduced area of experience. But one which nevertheless claims to be universal. Something like this overview of traditional art, and the overview is only partial. There are other things to be said on other occasions, and may help to answer the questions about primitive art. First, primitive artists appeared during the second half of the 19th century. They appeared after professional art had first questioned its own conventional purposes. The notorious Salon des Refus was held in 1863. This exhibition was not, of course, the reason for their appearance. The Bohemian chose to live in a way which defied normal class divisions, and his lifestyle, if not his work, tended to suggest that art could come from any class. They were treated as cultural sports, not because of their class origin, but because they refused or were ignorant of the fact that all artistic expression has traditionally to undergo a class transformation. In this way, they were quite distinct from amateurs, most but not all of whom came from the cultured classes. Amateurs, by definition, followed with less rigor the example of the professionals. The primitive begins alone. He inherits no practice. Because of this, the term primitive may appear at first to be justified. He does not use the pictorial grammar of the tradition, hence he is ungrammatical. He has not learned the technical skills which have evolved with the conventions, and hence he is clumsy. He often uses it many times, and hence he is naive. But then one has to ask, why does he refuse the tradition? And the answer is only partly that he was born far away from the tradition. The effort necessary to begin painting or sculpting in the social context in which he finds himself is so great that it could well include visiting the museums, but it never does, at least at the beginning. But why? Because he knows already that his own lived experience is forcing him to make art. Has no place in the tradition. How does he know this without having visited museums? He knows it because his whole experience is one of being excluded from the exercise of power in his society, and he realizes from the compulsion he now feels that art too has a kind of power. The will of primitives derives from faith in their own experience and a profound skepticism about society as they have found it. This is true even with such an amiable artist as Grandma Moses. I hope I have now made clear why the clumsiness of primitive art is the precondition of its eloquence. What it is saying could never be said with any ready-made skills, for what it is saying was never meant to be said.